Picture this. A leather bag hangs from a woman's fist. It is heavy. It drips. The smell rising from it is copper and rot, the perfume of slaughter. Inside the bag, human blood, gallons of it. Collected from the dead, scooped from wounds still warm, poured into this vessel like wine into an amphora. And now a severed head descends into the darkness of that bag. The hair is matted with dust and dried gore. The eyes are open, pale, filmy, catching the last light of a Central Asian sun that burns orange over a field of corpses. The mouth is slack. This mouth once gave orders that shook empires. This mouth once pronounced the freedom of nations. This mouth once proposed marriage to the woman who now holds it by the beard. She pushes the head down. The blood rises. It fills the nostrils. It floods the open mouth. It swallows the face of the man who swallowed kingdoms. The woman speaks. Her voice is hoarse from screaming commands across a battlefield that has just consumed 200,000 men. According to ancient accounts, she says, "Though I live and conquer you, you have undone me. You took my son by treachery, not honest battle. But I warned you. I swore by the sun. Now drink. Drink your fill of blood." The head disappears into the bag. The King of Kings drowns in the blood of his own soldiers. This is not legend. This is not myth. This is what the father of history recorded as the most credible account of how the greatest conqueror the ancient world had ever seen met his end. The woman's name is Tomyris. The head belonged to Cyrus the Great. He had conquered the Medes. He had crushed Lydia. He had walked into Babylon without a fight and freed the Jews from 70 years of captivity. The prophet Isaiah called him God's anointed. He built an empire stretching from the Mediterranean to the Hindu Kush, larger than anything the world had witnessed. Then he made one mistake. He underestimated a grieving mother. 30 years of unbroken victory, 30 years of watching kings kneel, armies scatter and empires fold like cloth, 30 years of being told he was chosen by the gods, blessed by fate, destined to rule everything his shadow touched. It ended here, on a steppe so remote that even his own historians struggled to name it. Against a people so obscure that Greeks called them simply the fish-eaters, because they knew nothing else about them, at the hands of a woman whose kingdom had no cities, no palaces, no written language. The Massagetae didn't build monuments, they didn't keep records. They wandered with their herds and worshipped the sun and buried their dead in unmarked graves on the endless grass. But they remembered how to kill, and their queen remembered how to hate. Historians still debate whether the head in blood story is literal truth or symbolic elaboration. Herodotus himself admitted other versions existed. And Theseus, writing from the Persian court a century later, told a completely different tale, one where Cyrus died from a javelin wound fighting a different tribe entirely, one where the Persians actually won. But here is what no one disputes. Cyrus went east, Cyrus fought nomads, and Cyrus never came back. The man who freed nations became a trophy. The king who showed mercy to the defeated found none when he fell. The emperor who built the largest realm in human history couldn't build a single day of survival against a woman who had nothing left to lose. How does a man conquer the world and lose everything to a widow on the edge of nowhere? How does an empire builder become a head in a bag? To understand, we must go back. Back before the blood. Back before the betrayal. Back to a time when Cyrus was just a Persian prince with ambition, and the Massagetae were just another tribe beyond the horizon. Back to when everyone still believed he was invincible. The smell of smoke reached Ecbatana before the army did. Cyrus was 30 years old when he burned the Median capital. 30 years old and already a regicide. His own grandfather, Astyages, king of the Medes, had tried to have him killed as an infant. A prophecy had warned that the boy would one day overthrow him. Astyages ordered the baby exposed on a mountainside. A herdsman saved him, raised him, and now, 3 decades later, the prophecy had fulfilled itself with fire and iron. The year was 550 BCE. The Median Empire had dominated the ancient Near East for generations. Its armies had helped destroy Assyria. Its kings had married into Babylonian royalty. Its capital held treasures from a dozen conquered peoples. Cyrus took it all in a single campaign. Historians still debate whether Astyages' own generals betrayed him, or whether Cyrus simply outfought a superior force. What survives is the result. The Median king was captured, his treasury emptied, his empire absorbed. Cyrus did not execute his grandfather. He kept him alive, a living testament to mercy and to the price of underestimating bloodlines. This was the pattern that would define Cyrus's conquests. Victory followed by surprising clemency, power demonstrated, then sheathed. The message was clear: surrender, and you might survive. Resist, and you would be remembered only by the smoke rising from your cities. 4 years later, he turned west. Croesus of Lydia was the richest man in the known world. His kingdom sat on gold deposits so vast that he invented coinage. His capital, Sardis, was a wonder of luxury. Palaces with heated floors, markets selling silk from the east and tin from the distant north. When Croesus heard that a Persian upstart had swallowed the Medes, he consulted the oracle at Delphi. The oracle replied, "If Croesus crosses the Halys River, he will destroy a great empire." Croesus crossed. The empire he destroyed was his own. The Battle of Timbra was a masterwork of tactical adaptation. Croesus had cavalry, the finest in the world, bred on Lydian grasslands armoured in bronze. Cyrus had camels, thousands of them pulled from his baggage train. Horses, it turned out, could not stand the smell of camels. The Lydian cavalry panicked, threw their riders, fled in chaos. The greatest mounted force in the Mediterranean broke without a single Persian spear touching them. Sardis fell after a 14-day siege. A Persian soldier noticed a Lydian guard dropping his helmet down a cliff face and climbing down to retrieve it, revealing a hidden path. That night, the Persians scaled the impregnable walls. Croesus woke to find enemies in his bedroom. According to Herodotus, Cyrus built a pyre and placed Croesus upon it, ready to burn alive. Then, at the last moment, he ordered the flames extinguished. Croesus became an advisor. Another king, humbled, spared, absorbed, another lesson in the Persian way. But it was Babylon that proved Cyrus was not merely lucky. Babylon was the greatest city on earth. Its walls were so thick that chariots could race along the top. Its hanging gardens were among the wonders of the world. Its empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the borders of Egypt. Its king, Nabonidus, was a scholar who spent more time excavating ancient temples than governing his realm. Cyrus didn't besiege Babylon, he walked in. The Persian engineers diverted the Euphrates River, which ran beneath the city walls. When the water level dropped, Cyrus's soldiers waded through the riverbed and emerged inside the city. Babylon fell in a single night. Nabonidus' son Belshazzar, the same Belshazzar from the Bible, the one who saw the writing on the wall, died before dawn. The date was October 539 BCE. Cyrus issued a cylinder of baked clay declaring religious freedom for all peoples. He allowed the Jews, captive in Babylon for 70 years, to return home and rebuild their temple. The prophet Isaiah would later call him Messiah, Anointed One, the only non-Jew ever given that title in Hebrew scripture. In 10 years, Cyrus had done what no one in history had accomplished. He united the entire Near East under one rule. Medes, Lydians, Babylonians, Elamites, Armenians, Jews, all subjects of one throne. His title expanded with each conquest. King of Anshan, King of Persia, King of Media, King of Babylon, King of the four corners of the world. He was 59 years old. He had never lost a war. He had never been wounded in battle. He had never met an enemy he could not defeat, deceive, or absorb. Now he looked east. Beyond the Caspian Sea, beyond the edges of his maps lived peoples who had never knelt to anyone. Nomads, horse archers, tribes who measured wealth in cattle and freedom in miles of open steppe. The Massagetae. They had no cities to besiege, no treasuries to plunder, no kings who feared losing their thrones. They had only grass, horses, and a queen who owed nothing to any empire. Cyrus decided to take them anyway. And that decision, born of 30 years of success, 30 years of believing that nothing could resist his will, would cost him everything. 3 months' march beyond the Caspian, the grass changed colour. Persian scouts sent ahead of the main army reported endless plains that shifted from green to gold to brown as autumn approached. No roads, no walls, no permanent settlements of any kind, just herds of horses so vast they looked like moving shadows on the horizon, and the people who followed them, the Massagetae. Greeks called them Scythians, though that name covered a dozen different peoples spread across the steppe from the Black Sea to the borders of China. The Massagetae were one branch of this horse-riding civilization, perhaps the fiercest, certainly the least interested in what the settled world had to offer. They lived in wagons covered with felt. They ate horse meat, drank mare's milk fermented until it burned the throat, and dressed in leather and fur that stank of animal fat and smoke. Persian soldiers, accustomed to the perfumed courts of Babylon and the tiled palaces of Susa, found them repulsive. But their weapons told a different story. Massagetae warriors carried composite bows that could punch arrows through bronze armour at 200 paces. Their battle axes were bronze and gold. Gold because the steppe had so much of it they used the metal for tools. Every man was a rider, every rider was an archer. Every archer was trained from childhood to shoot backward at full gallop, turning flight into attack. According to Herodotus, they worshipped only one god, the sun. They swore oaths by its light, made sacrifices at dawn, and believed that nothing hidden in darkness could survive its judgment. Their queen would later invoke this god when she made her promise to Cyrus, and then there were the women. Historians still debate whether Greek accounts of Massagetae warrior women were accurate or exaggerated. Archaeological evidence, graves of women buried with weapons, their bones showing the marks of combat injuries, suggests at least some truth. These were not people who kept their women in seclusion. These were people who needed every rider, every bow, every blade. Their queen was Tomyris. She had come to power after her husband's death. No sons had challenged her claim. No council of elders had installed a male regent. She ruled alone, a widow commanding a nation of horse warriors in a land where weakness meant extermination. Ancient sources give us almost nothing about her life before Cyrus's invasion. We don't know her age, her appearance, or even if Tomyris was her birth name. The word might mean iron or brave in ancient Iranian languages. It might be a title rather than a name. She emerges from history fully formed, a queen, a mother, a commander. Her son was Spargapises. He led the Massagetae army, young, ambitious, eager to prove himself against the legendary Persians. He had never faced professional soldiers from the great empires. He had never seen infantry formations or siege engineers or the disciplined ranks that had crushed Lydia and absorbed Babylon. He would learn. The Massagetae knew the Persians were coming. The steppe had no secrets. Smoke on the horizon, dust clouds from marching columns, horses screaming across the grass with warnings. Tomyris gathered her warriors and waited at the Araxes River, the traditional boundary between her lands and the settled world to the south. She did not want this war. According to Herodotus, she understood exactly what Cyrus wanted. Not tribute, not alliance, but absorption. The Persian way, mercy to those who submitted, annihilation to those who resisted, left no room for proud peoples who refused to kneel. The Massagetae would either become subjects or corpses, but she offered peace anyway. Her message to Cyrus, preserved in Greek translation, shows a queen who understood the stakes better than the king who threatened her. She told him to stop building his bridge across the Araxes. She told him to be content ruling his own lands. She told him she had no interest in his empire and expected him to have no interest in hers. Cease, King of the Medes. You cannot know if this venture will profit you. Rule your own people and bear to see me ruling mine. The words of a pragmatist, the words of someone who had seen too many wars to want another, the words of a mother who knew what battle would cost. Cyrus ignored her. Some ancient accounts suggest he was motivated by more than territorial expansion. The eastern frontier was unstable. Raiding parties crossed into Persian territory, disrupted trade routes, threatened the empire's edges. A decisive campaign would secure the border for generations. Other sources hint at something more personal, a need to prove, at 70 years old, that he was still the conqueror who had burned Ecbatana and walked into Babylon. Whatever the reason, Cyrus began building his bridge, and Tomyris, watching from the far bank, understood that words had failed. What came next would be written in blood, hers, his, or both. She made one final offer, a fair fight, an open battle. Let one of them retreat 3 days' march from the river, and let the other cross unopposed. Then they would settle this like warriors, not engineers. Cyrus called his council, and the worst advice of his life was about to be spoken. The council met in a tent that smelled of lamp oil and old leather. Cyrus sat on a folding throne, a travelling king's accommodation, gilded but practical, designed to remind visitors that Persian power followed the army wherever it marched. Around him stood generals who had broken the walls of Sardis, priests who had blessed the conquest of Babylon, and one man whose presence still surprised everyone who saw him: Croesus of Lydia. The king who had lost everything now advised the king who had taken it. But before the council could debate Tomyris' offer of fair battle, Cyrus revealed something else, a plan he had already attempted, a scheme that had failed before a single sword was drawn. He had proposed marriage. According to Herodotus, Cyrus's ambassadors had crossed the Araxes weeks earlier with gifts of gold, silk, and a question: would Queen Tomyris consent to become the wife of the King of Kings? The logic was elegant. Marriage would unite the Massagetae with the Persian Empire without bloodshed. Tomyris would gain wealth, security, and a place in the greatest court on earth. Her people would gain protection from rival tribes, access to trade routes, and the prestige of alliance with the conquerors of Babylon. Tomyris saw through it immediately. He was not courting her, later historians observed. He was courting her kingdom. The marriage would make Cyrus the de facto ruler of the Massagetae. Her warriors would become his cavalry. Her grazing lands would become his frontier buffer. Her independence would dissolve into the soft prison of a royal harem, where foreign queens grew old and irrelevant while their homelands were absorbed by Persian governors. She refused. No negotiation, no counteroffer, just a single word: no. Historians still debate whether Cyrus genuinely expected her to accept, or whether the proposal was merely the opening move in a longer game, a way to appear reasonable before the inevitable war, to tell future generations that he had offered peace and been rejected. Persian ideology demanded at least the pretense of just cause. Cyrus the merciful, Cyrus the reluctant warrior. Cyrus who only destroyed those who refused his generous terms. The refusal stung. Cyrus was not accustomed to being told no. His first wife had been a Median princess. Given to seal the alliance between their peoples, her consent was never asked. His conquests had brought him daughters of kings, women from every corner of the known world, all of them accepting their fate as the price of their father's survival. A widow from beyond the edge of civilization rejecting him. It was insult compounded with absurdity. But Cyrus was pragmatic. Wounded pride could wait. The kingdom could not. Now Tomyris' offer lay before the council. A fair fight. 3 days withdrawal, then battle in the open. The generals debated. Some favoured accepting. The Massagetae cavalry was legendary, but Persian infantry had crushed horsemen before. Others urged caution. Fighting nomads on their own ground had destroyed armies throughout history. Then Croesus spoke. The old Lydian king, who had lost his realm to this very man, who had watched his capital burn and his treasury emptied, who had been placed on a pyre and somehow survived. Croesus offered advice that would damn them all. "My lord," he reportedly said, "I have learned wisdom through suffering. Let me share it." His suggestion was practical. The Massagetae, he explained, had never experienced Persian luxury. They drank fermented milk, not wine. They ate plain meat, not feasted on the delicacies of Babylon. Their pleasures were simple because they had never known anything else. "Set a trap," Croesus advised. "Cross the river, leave a camp with a small guard, weak troops, expendable men. Fill the camp with wine and food. When the Massagetae attack, they will find a feast. They will not be able to resist. Wine is a poison they have no defense against. While they sleep off their drunkenness, return with your main force and slaughter them." It was brilliant. It was dishonourable. It was exactly the kind of scheme that violated every principle of fair warfare. Cyrus hesitated. His empire was built on a reputation for honest dealing, mercy to the surrendered, respect for the brave, clemency even to defeated kings. Using wine as a weapon against people who had never tasted it felt like poisoning children. But his advisors pressed him. One voice, louder than the rest, made the argument that silenced all objections. It would be an intolerable disgrace for Cyrus, son of Cambyses, to give ground before a woman. There it was, the word that had toppled kings and ended empires since the beginning of recorded history. Woman. A challenge not to his strategy but to his manhood. A suggestion that retreat, even tactical retreat, even a retreat that would lead to advantageous battle, was emasculation because the enemy commander lacked a certain anatomy. Cyrus made his choice. Accept Tomyris' offer, but cross himself instead of allowing her to cross. Take the fight to her territory, and when the moment was right, spring Croesus' trap. The bridge across the Araxes was completed within days. Persian engineers lashed boats together, laid planks, created a crossing that could move an army in hours. Tomyris watched from the far bank. She had offered war or peace, invasion or withdrawal, blood or compromise. She had done everything possible to avoid what was coming. Now she prepared for it. The messenger arrived at dusk, his horse lathered and trembling from a ride across the steppe. He carried words from Tomyris, her final words before blood. The Persian scribes recorded them, and Herodotus preserved them in Greek a century later. Even filtered through translation and time, the rage in them still burns. "You bloodthirsty Cyrus," she began. No titles, no diplomatic courtesies, just the naked accusation of a woman who had stopped pretending. "Pride not yourself on this poor success. It was the grape juice, which when you drink it makes you so mad, and as you swallow it down brings up such bold and wicked words. It was this poison by which you ensnared my child. You overcame him by treachery, not in fair open fight." The trap had worked. 3 days earlier, Cyrus had crossed the Araxes with his main army, leaving behind a camp exactly as Croesus suggested. Weak troops, abundant food, and wine, barrels of it, unmixed with water, the pure concentrated fermentation that Greeks and Persians diluted but drank freely. Spargapises, commanding the Massagetae advance force, had attacked the camp at dawn. His warriors expected a fight. They found a feast. No one knows who tasted the wine first. Perhaps a scout curious about the dark liquid in clay jars. Perhaps a captain sampling what he assumed was some strange Persian drink. Within an hour, the entire Massagetae force was drinking. Within 2 hours, they were drunk beyond function. Within 3 hours, they were unconscious. Cyrus returned with his army and found them helpless. The slaughter was efficient. Thousands of Massagetae warriors, young men who had trained since childhood, who had killed wolves and raiders and rival tribesmen, died without lifting a weapon. They were cut down in their sleep, throats slit, skulls crushed, bodies left in heaps beside overturned wine jars and half-eaten food. Spargapises was not killed, he was taken alive. The prince of the Massagetae, heir to Tomyris' power, woke in chains. Persian guards watched him vomit the poison from his stomach. Persian officers questioned him about Massagetae movements, numbers, weaknesses. He was a hostage now, leverage against a mother who had refused marriage and would surely not refuse her son's life. Historians still debate whether Cyrus intended to use Spargapises for negotiation or public humiliation. What happened next made the question moot. When Spargapises' head cleared, when the wine's fog lifted and he understood what had happened, he asked his captors for one thing: to be unbound, to have his hands freed. The Persians, perhaps respecting his rank, perhaps seeing no threat in a single prisoner, agreed. Spargapises killed himself. The method varies by source: a hidden blade, a stolen sword, a deliberate provocation that forced guards to strike him down. What doesn't vary is the meaning. Death was preferable to the shame of capture. Death was preferable to being used against his mother. Death was the last act of a warrior who'd been defeated by treachery and refused to let that treachery claim anything more. Tomyris received the news across the steppe. Her son was dead. Her army was decimated. Her offer of fair battle had been answered with poison and massacre. Now came the second message, the threat. "Restore my son to me," she demanded, though she must have known he was already dead. "And get out of my country unpunished. But if you do not, I swear by the sun, the sovereign lord of the Massagetae, bloodthirsty as you are, I will give you your fill of blood." The sun, her people's god, the burning eye that saw everything, that tolerated no lies, that demanded oaths be honoured with life itself. She was not making a threat. She was making a vow, one witnessed, by the only power her people acknowledged. Cyrus read the message and, according to surviving accounts, dismissed it. He had heard threats before. Croesus had threatened him with Lydian cavalry. Nabonidus had threatened him with Babylonian walls. Astyages had threatened him with Median armies. Every one of them had fallen. Every one of their threats had become dust. Why should a nomad queen be different? But something had changed in this campaign that Cyrus perhaps did not recognize. His previous enemies had fought for territory, for wealth, for survival. They could be bought, negotiated with, absorbed. A king who lost his crown but kept his life might accept defeat. Tomyris was not fighting for territory. The Massagetae didn't believe in owning land. She was not fighting for wealth. Gold meant nothing to people who used it for axe heads. She was not even fighting for survival. She would gladly die if it meant taking Cyrus with her. She was fighting for something Cyrus had never faced. Vengeance. The pure, incandescent rage of a mother whose child had been murdered by deception. A hatred so total that it left no room for calculation, no space for compromise, no possibility of surrender. Cyrus had conquered kings and broken empires. He had never faced grief, and grief, unlike armies, cannot be defeated. Before we see how this ends, understand one thing. Cyrus had never lost a battle in 30 years. He would not lose this one either, not on the field. What destroyed him was something no general can plan for, and no empire can withstand. That decision would haunt him before sunrise. Cyrus held a council of war the night before the final battle. His generals urged caution. The Massagetae had been wounded but not destroyed. The slaughter at the wine camp had killed perhaps 10,000 warriors, a significant force, but only a fraction of Tomyris' total strength. Intelligence suggested she had gathered reinforcements from allied tribes across the steppe. The numbers were uncertain, but they were large. Worse, the terrain favoured the nomads. Open grassland stretched in every direction. No hills to anchor a defensive position, no rivers to protect flanks, no forests to break cavalry charges. Persian infantry, which had crushed the Lydians and awed the Babylonians, would be exposed on all sides to horse archers who could strike and retreat and strike again until exhaustion did what courage could not. Some advisors recommended withdrawal, cross back over the Araxes, secure the bridge, let the Massagetae exhaust themselves attacking a prepared position. Time was on Persia's side. The empire had endless resources, endless reinforcements, endless patience. Tomyris had only her rage, and rage eventually burns itself out. Cyrus refused. Retreat was impossible, not because of tactics, but because of reputation. He had crossed the river in defiance of Tomyris' offer. He had used treachery to destroy her son's army. He had staked his honour, the honour of the Persian crown, on this campaign. To withdraw now would tell every subject people from Egypt to India that the King of Kings could be faced down by nomads, that the empire was paper, that resistance was possible, better to die than retreat. Historians still debate whether this was pride or calculation. Perhaps Cyrus genuinely believed his army could win in open battle. Persian forces had advantages the Massagetae lacked. Iron weapons against bronze, disciplined formations against individual warriors, supply lines against foragers who lived off the land. A set-piece engagement might favour the invaders, or perhaps Cyrus at 70 years old simply could not imagine defeat. 30 years of victory had calcified into certainty. The gods favoured him. Fate protected him. He was Cyrus the Great, and the Great did not lose. He ordered the army to advance at dawn. The march took 2 days. Persian scouts reported Massagetae cavalry shadowing them on all sides, distant riders who vanished when approached, who watched and counted and waited. The enemy knew exactly where they were. The enemy chose not to engage. The enemy was leading them somewhere. Cyrus noticed but did not alter course. Every mile took him deeper into the steppe, further from the river, further from retreat. The grass grew higher here, tall enough to hide crouching men, tall enough to muffle the sound of hoofbeats until it was too late. On the second night, the Persians made camp in a shallow depression between 2 ridges. Not ideal ground, the ridges blocked sight lines, and the depression collected morning mist that would obscure movement. But the army was tired, and the generals assured Cyrus that scouts had found no enemy concentration within a day's march. They were wrong. Tomyris had used the 2 days to gather her full strength. Every warrior who could ride, every archer who could draw, every clan chief who owed allegiance to the Massagetae throne. They had converged from across the steppe, travelling by night, hiding by day, assembling beyond those ridges in numbers that Persian scouts had never imagined. According to Herodotus, her army may have numbered as many as 200,000. The figure is almost certainly exaggerated. No steppe confederation could field such a force, but the reality was clear enough. Tomyris had more warriors than Cyrus had soldiers, perhaps twice as many, perhaps more. She had let him advance. She had let him believe the slaughter at the wine camp had broken her power. She had let him march into perfect killing ground, while she gathered a fist that would crush everything he had brought across the river. And now, as morning mist rose from the depression, and Persian soldiers stirred from sleep, the Massagetae appeared on the ridgelines. At first, they were just shadows against the dawn, dark shapes that might have been rocks or trees or tricks of the light. Then the shapes moved, then they multiplied, then they became riders, and the riders became a line, and the line became a wall, and the wall surrounded the depression on 3 sides. The 4th side, the way back to the river, the way back to Persia, the way back to life, was already blocked. Cyrus had walked into a trap. The greatest conqueror of his age, the man who had outwitted kings and outmaneuvered empires, had been played by a widow's grief. Tomyris sat on horseback at the centre of the Massagetae line. She wore armour of leather and bronze. In her hand, some accounts say, she carried the sword that had belonged to her son, the blade Spargapises had used to end his own shame. She did not send a messenger, she did not demand surrender, she did not give Cyrus any of the courtesies he had extended to Croesus and Nabonidus, and every other king he had defeated. She simply raised her sword, and here's where it gets worse. The sound came first, not war cries. The Massagetae did not waste breath on screaming. They saved their lungs for riding and drawing. What reached the Persian camp was the drumming of hooves on packed earth, a vibration that started in the feet and climbed through the legs and settled in the chest like a second heartbeat, growing louder, growing closer, becoming a roar that swallowed every other sound. Then came the arrows. The sky darkened, not metaphorically, literally darkened, as 10,000 shafts rose from the ridgelines and arced toward the depression below. Each arrow had been crafted from straight birchwood, fletched with eagle feathers, tipped with bronze heads designed to punch through armour. The Massagetae could draw and loose 12 times per minute. For the first 60 seconds of the battle, nothing existed except the whistling death falling from above. Persian shields went up, the famous wicker shields, Geron, the Greeks called them, that had stopped Median arrows and Lydian javelins. They stopped some of the Massagetae shafts. Not enough. Men died standing in formation, arrows finding gaps in armour, piercing throats and thighs and the backs of those who turned to flee. Cyrus's generals screamed orders, form squares, lock shields, return fire. But the Persian archers, trained to shoot from fixed positions, could not match opponents who fired from moving horses. For every Massagetae warrior who fell, and some did fall, caught by lucky shots or well-aimed volleys, 3 Persians collapsed with feathered shafts in their bodies. The arrow storm lasted, according to reconstructions, perhaps 20 minutes. 20 minutes of standing helpless while death rained from every direction. 20 minutes of watching comrades drop and knowing that movement meant exposure and stillness meant target. Then the Massagetae ran out of arrows, and the real killing began. Historians still debate whether Tomyris led the charge personally or commanded from the ridge. Later, artistic depictions show her at the front, sword raised, screaming her son's name as she crashed into the Persian lines. Herodotus does not specify. What he records is the impact. They rushed upon each other and fought hand-to-hand with spears and daggers. The collision was audible for miles, bronze on bronze, bronze on flesh, bronze on bone, the wet crunch of weapons finding targets, the gasping screams of men pierced through armour, the endless rhythmic thud of bodies hitting ground. Persian infantry fought from tight formations, shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, each man protecting the man beside him. It was a system that had conquered empires. It required discipline, training, and above all, stable ground. The Massagetae gave them none of these. Cavalry swept around the Persian flanks, never engaging directly, always moving, forcing the formations to contract and contract again. Warriors on foot, yes, the nomads fought on foot when necessary, slammed into the Persian lines with axes that shattered shields and spears that punched through breastplates. The gold-bronze weapons of the steppe, which Persian observers had mocked as barbaric, proved devastating at close range. Cyrus was in the centre of his formation, 70 years old, wearing the armour of the King of Kings, gold-chased, magnificent, designed to inspire awe in subjects and terror in enemies. It also made him the most visible target on the battlefield. He fought. Sources agree on this much. Cyrus did not hide behind his guards. He killed Massagetae warriors with his own hands. At 70, after 3 decades of leaving combat to subordinates, he remembered how to wield a sword. He remembered the Median campaigns of his youth. He remembered being hungry and desperate and willing to do anything to survive. But remembering was not enough. The battle lasted, by Herodotus' account, most of the day. Long they remained fighting closely together, neither would give ground. This was not a rout. This was not a collapse. This was two armies grinding each other to dust, neither able to break the other, both too committed to retreat. The turning point, if there was a single turning point, came in the afternoon. Persian reserves, held back to exploit any weakness in the Massagetae line, were committed to prevent a collapse on the left flank. The cavalry that should have protected them was already dead or scattered. For the first time in 30 years, a Persian army fought without the option of withdrawal. Cyrus fell somewhere in the final hours. The sources disagree about how. Herodotus says he died in the general slaughter, one corpse among tens of thousands. Ctesias claims he was wounded by an Indian javelin, suggesting Massagetae allies from further east, and survived 3 days before dying. Other accounts mention a spear through the chest, a sword to the neck, a crushing blow from a bronze axe. What no account disputes, the King of Kings died on that field. The man who had freed the Jews and conquered Babylon and built the largest empire in history ended his life in a depression on the Central Asian steppe, surrounded by the bodies of men who had followed him into a trap. The greater part of the Persian army was destroyed there on the spot, Herodotus records, and Cyrus himself fell there, after a reign of 30 years. 30 years, gone in an afternoon, and Tomyris was not finished. While the Spartans had their Thermopylae and the Romans would have their Cannae, the Greeks who wrote the first histories gave a different battle the title of bloodiest. Of all the battles fought among the barbarians, Herodotus wrote, I judge this to have been the most violent. Not the most strategic, not the most significant, the most violent. The father of history had collected accounts of wars from Egypt to India, from the fall of Assyria to the conquest of Babylon. He had described sieges and massacres and the destruction of entire peoples, and he reserved his strongest language for what happened in that depression east of the Caspian Sea. The violence was total. Arrows exhausted, the armies had closed to arm's length. Persian spears against Massagetae lances, Persian short swords against steppe battle axes, Persian discipline against nomad fury. Neither side could retreat, the Massagetae because Tomyris had forbidden it, the Persians because they had nowhere to go. The ground, witnesses remembered, became impossible to walk on. Bodies piled on bodies, men tripped over corpses and were stabbed before they could rise. Blood pooled in the depression's lowest points, ankle deep in places thick enough to splash with each step. The summer sun baked it into a reek that survivors would remember for the rest of their lives, copper and rot and the sharp ammonia of emptied bowels. Individual combats disappeared into the crush. There was no room for skill, for technique, for the training that Persian soldiers had spent years perfecting. There was only pushing forward or being pushed down, stabbing whatever flesh appeared before you, dying when someone stabbed back. The Massagetae had an advantage no tactician could have planned. They were fighting for vengeance. Persian soldiers fought for empire, for pay, for the promise of land after service. The warriors facing them fought for a dead prince. They fought for a queen who had lost her son. They fought for the simple, burning need to make someone pay for what had been done to their people. Historians still debate whether rage improves or impairs combat effectiveness. The Massagetae provided evidence for both. Their fury made them reckless, charging into spear walls that should have stopped them, accepting wounds that should have been fatal, refusing to break even when breaking was the rational choice. But their fury also made them relentless. When a Massagetae warrior fell, another stepped over the body and kept fighting. When a Persian line buckled, there was no respite, no pause to regroup, just immediate exploitation. The Persian commanders died in sequence. First the generals on the flanks, exposed as they tried to organize their crumbling formations. Then the cavalry leaders, pulled from their horses and butchered on the ground. Then the royal guard captains, who fought with desperate skill but were overwhelmed by numbers. Each death accelerated the collapse. Each collapse created new deaths. Cyrus tried to rally what remained, 70 years old, blood-soaked, surrounded by a shrinking ring of guards. He reportedly called for his men to hold, to form a final square, to die facing the enemy if they must die, but to die as Persians. Some heard him, some obeyed. But the Massagetae were already inside the formation, already cutting down guardsmen from behind, already reaching for the golden armor that marked the King of Kings. The moment of his death was not recorded by anyone who survived to tell it. What survives is the aftermath. When the killing finally stopped, when the Massagetae had no more enemies standing, when the depression had become a charnel pit of 2 armies' worth of corpses, Tomyris gave a single order: find him. Thousands of bodies, Persians and Massagetae tangled together, impossible to separate without handling each one. Armour stripped by dying men seeking relief, faces caked with blood and dust, unrecognisable to anyone who had not known them in life. The search would take hours. Some accounts say it took until nightfall, but Tomyris was patient. She had been patient when Cyrus built his bridge, patient when he crossed the river, patient when he used wine to slaughter her son's army, patient when her own warriors screamed for immediate attack. Now she waited, mounted on her horse at the edge of the depression, while her people turned over corpse after corpse. The sun was setting when they found him. Golden armour, Persian features, the lined face of an old man who had lived long enough to see everything he built come to ruin. Cyrus II of Persia, Cyrus the Great, the King of Kings, the liberator of Babylon, the anointed of Isaiah's prophecy, dead in the dirt, far from home, surrounded by the ruins of his army and the silence of the steppe. Tomyris dismounted. She walked through the carnage to where they had laid out his body. She looked down at the face of the man who had taken her son. Then she drew her knife. The knife was not ceremonial. It was a working blade. The kind Massagetae women used to skin animals, to cut leather, to butcher meat for their families. Short, curved, wickedly sharp. Tomyris had carried it since girlhood. It had taken the lives of wolves and horses and men. Now it would take a king's head. She knelt beside the body. Around her, Massagetae warriors stood in silence. No cheering, no celebration. The battle had cost them tens of thousands of their own. Fathers, sons, brothers, husbands, all dead in that depression mixed with Persian corpses in a harvest of grief. Victory tasted like ash. But the queen had made an oath. An oath sworn before the sun must be kept. According to Herodotus, Tomyris spoke to the corpse as she worked. Her words were recorded by survivors, Massagetae who would tell the story to their children, who would tell it to traders, who would carry it west to Greek historians hungry for tales of the barbarian East. Though I live and have conquered you in battle, you have destroyed me, for you took my son by treachery. The knife bit into flesh, through muscle against bone. I warned you that I would give you your fill of blood. The work was not quick. Severing a human head requires strength, patience, and a willingness to continue when every instinct screams to stop. The neck structure, vertebrae, tendons, blood vessels, the thick muscles that support the skull, resist dismemberment. It takes time. Tomyris took the time. When she finished, she held the head by its hair. The eyes were still open. The mouth was slack. Blood dripped from the severed neck, pooling on the trampled grass. Then she called for a skin. Historians still debate whether the blood bag ritual was Massagetae custom or Tomyris's personal invention. Herodotus reports it without explanation, as though it required none. A leather bag, perhaps a water skin, perhaps something prepared specifically for this purpose, was brought to the queen. It was already full. Human blood collected from the battlefield, scooped from wounds still flowing, drained from bodies not yet cold, poured into this vessel until it bulged with the substance that Cyrus had spilled so freely throughout his conquests. Tomyris lifted the head over the bag's opening. She paused, just for a moment according to some accounts, as if savouring the anticipation. Then she plunged it down. The blood closed over Cyrus's face. It filled his mouth, the same mouth that had ordered the wine trap. It flooded his nostrils, the same nostrils that had breathed the perfumed air of Babylon's palaces. It swallowed his eyes, the same eyes that had watched a dozen kings kneel before him. "Now drink," Tomyris said. "Drink your fill." The Massagetae did not preserve the head as a trophy. They did not display it on a pike or parade it before their camps. What happened to it afterward is lost to history. Buried, perhaps, with their own dead. Or left on the steppe for wolves and vultures. Or burned in a funeral that no one recorded. What mattered was the fulfillment of the oath. Tomyris had promised Cyrus blood. She had delivered. Some later accounts add details that Herodotus omits. One tradition claims she fashioned his skull into a drinking cup, gilded with gold, and used it for the rest of her life. Another says she had the skin sewn shut with the head inside and hung from her tent as a warning. These may be elaborations, the kind of gruesome details that grow in the telling, or they may preserve memories that the Greek historian chose not to include. The battle was over. The real tragedy was just beginning. What remained of the Persian army, a scattered few thousand perhaps from the tens of thousands who had crossed the Araxes, fled east, then south, then wherever they could find passage back to the empire. Most died on the steppe, picked off by Massagetae pursuers or lost in the endless grass. Those who survived carried news that would shake the ancient world. Cyrus was dead, the greatest conqueror in human history, the founder of the largest empire ever seen, the king who had seemed blessed by every god ever worshipped, dead, killed by nomads, killed by a woman. In Persia, his son Cambyses received the news. The succession had been planned. Cyrus had named him heir years earlier, but the manner of death threatened everything. An empire built on invincibility had just been proven vincible. Subject peoples from Egypt to Babylon began calculating whether the moment for rebellion had arrived. The body, or what remained of it, needed to be recovered. And this is where history becomes complicated. The smell of embalming spices filled the tomb chamber. 2 centuries after Tomyris' victory, Alexander of Macedon stood inside Cyrus's mausoleum at Massagetae. He had conquered Persia himself by then, done what no Greek had managed, destroyed the empire that had threatened his people for generations. Now, in the heart of the fallen realm, he wanted to pay respects to the king who had built it. The tomb was modest by Persian standards, a small stone structure on a stepped platform, surrounded by gardens that had once been tended by Zoroastrian priests. Inside, Alexander found a golden sarcophagus. Inside the sarcophagus he found a body, intact, embalmed, complete. According to Arrian, who recorded Alexander's campaigns, the Macedonian king looked upon Cyrus's preserved corpse and was moved to tears. He ordered offerings placed at the tomb. He punished soldiers who had vandalized it during the conquest. He treated the dead Persian with a reverence he showed to few of the living. Historians still debate whether Alexander understood the contradiction. If Tomyris took Cyrus's head, if she drowned it in blood and kept it as a trophy, how did the body arrive at Pasargadae whole? The sources offer no resolution. Herodotus, writing closest to the events, insists on the head-in-blood story as the most credible version. Ctesias, writing from the Persian court itself, claims Cyrus died from a javelin wound and was brought home by victorious troops. Neither acknowledges the other's version. Neither explains how both could be true. Possible explanations have multiplied across centuries. Perhaps Tomyris returned the head after fulfilling her oath, and Persian survivors recovered and reattached it. Ancient embalming techniques, while sophisticated, would have struggled with such a task, but not impossibly so. Perhaps the Persians paid a ransom for their king's remains, gold and goods and prisoners exchanged for a corpse that could receive proper burial. The Massagetae, their vengeance satisfied, might have accepted. Perhaps Ctesias was right, and the entire Tomyris account is Greek invention, a morality tale about hubris and nemesis dressed up as history. The Persians won the battle, recovered the body, and Greeks who hated Persia created a legend of humiliating defeat. Or perhaps the tomb at Pasargadae held someone else, a substitute, a placeholder for a king whose actual remains were too shameful to acknowledge. The truth died with the witnesses. What survived was the legend. By the time Herodotus wrote his histories, the story of Tomyris and Cyrus had spread across the Greek world. It contained everything his audience wanted: a powerful king brought low, a woman's vengeance fulfilled, a barbarian triumph over civilized tyranny. It confirmed Greek beliefs about Persian arrogance and the limits of earthly power. It made excellent narrative. Whether it made excellent history is another question. The Massagetae left no written records. They built no monuments. Their version of events, what actually happened in that depression, what Tomyris actually said and did, what became of Cyrus's remains, vanished with them. Within a few generations, they had merged with other steppe peoples. Their identity dissolved into the great movements of nomadic history. Tomyris herself disappeared from the record after the battle. No source describes her later life, her death, or her burial. She entered history for one moment, the moment she destroyed Cyrus, and then returned to the silence from which she came. The Persians, meanwhile, rewrote their own history. Cyrus became a myth of enlightened rulership. His tolerance, his mercy, his freeing of the Jews, these survived and grew. His death became vague, distant, a minor detail in a glorious reign. Persian inscriptions mention campaigns in the east but give no specifics about their outcomes. The Behistun inscription, carved by Cyrus's successor Darius, lists royal achievements without acknowledging the founder's defeat. Empires remember what serves them, they forget what does not. And so Cyrus the Great entered legend as the perfect king, the liberator, the anointed one, the founder of a civilization that lasted 2 centuries and shaped the ancient world. His tomb became a pilgrimage site, his name became synonymous with enlightened conquest. The blood bag was forgotten, the woman was forgotten, the grief and rage and revenge were smoothed away by time and politics and the needs of living powers. Only the Greeks remembered, and they remembered because it made a good story, not because they cared about truth. History remembers the victory, it forgot the price. The irony was perfect and therefore probably intentional. Cyrus had spent his life absorbing kingdoms. After his death, his story was absorbed by everyone who found it useful. For the Jews, he became God's instrument. The pagan king who fulfilled prophecy, freed the chosen people, and proved that the divine plan extended beyond Israel's borders. The book of Isaiah calls him anointed, the only non-Jew to receive that title in Hebrew scripture. The book of Ezra credits him with ordering the temple rebuilt. Jewish tradition remembers Cyrus as a righteous Gentile, proof that God could work through anyone. For the Greeks, he became a warning, the conqueror who overreached, the king who confused success with invincibility, the tyrant who met justice in the form of a grieving mother. Herodotus structured his entire history around this theme. Great powers rise and fall. Hubris invites nemesis. The mighty are humbled by the forces they underestimate. For the Persians, he became a founding myth, the first of the great kings, the creator of the imperial system, the model all successors measured themselves against. Darius I, who seized the throne after Cambyses' mysterious death, legitimized his rule by claiming to restore Cyrus's vision. Later kings added to the legend. By the time Alexander arrived, Cyrus had transcended history into something like divinity. Historians still debate whether any of these Cyruses resembled the actual man. The fragments that survive suggest someone more complicated. A brilliant general, certainly. No one conquers 3 empires by accident. A shrewd politician who understood that mercy could be more effective than massacre. But also a gambler who risked everything on campaigns that could have destroyed him. A man capable of the wine trap, of using deception against people who had never tasted alcohol. A king who heard a mother's threat and dismissed it. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered in Babylon's ruins in 1879, is sometimes called the first declaration of human rights. It proclaims religious tolerance, condemns oppression, celebrates Cyrus's peaceful entry into Babylon. Modern Iran has claimed it as a symbol of Persian civilization's enlightened values, but the cylinder was propaganda. Court scribes wrote it to justify conquest, to reassure nervous Babylonians that the new regime meant them no harm. It says nothing about the Medes burned in their capital, the Lydians enslaved after Sardis fell, the Massagetae slaughtered with poisoned wine. Great men curate their legacies, they do not leave honest accounts. Tomyris left nothing at all, no cylinder, no inscription, no tomb that archaeologists have ever found. The woman who killed the King of Kings exists only in Greek texts, written by people who never met her, never visited her land, never spoke her language. Her name might mean iron or brave in ancient Iranian, or it might be a Greek approximation of something untranslatable. Her face appears in Renaissance paintings where European artists imagined her as a European queen in European clothing, holding a European sword over a cleanly severed head that looks nothing like a 70-year-old Persian man. She became a symbol. Power of women, the art historians call the motif. Female rulers who humbled male tyrants. Judith with Holofernes, Jael with Sisera, Tomyris with Cyrus. The same composition repeated across centuries. A woman, a head, a reversal of expected gender hierarchies. The symbol survived, the person did not. What did she do after the battle? Did she rule her people for decades, growing old on the steppe, dying peacefully surrounded by grandchildren? Did she fall in a later war, against some enemy whose name we'll never know? Did she abandon power after her vengeance was complete, retreating into private grief for the son she couldn't save? The silence is absolute. History recorded her rage and then lost interest in everything that followed. Perhaps that's appropriate. She was never fighting for fame, she was fighting for blood and she got it. What came after was none of Greece's concern. The Massagetae themselves faded from history within a few generations. They merged with other Scythian peoples, were absorbed by successor tribes, eventually disappeared into the vast demographic churning of the Central Asian steppe. Modern Kazakhs claim descent from them. Kazakhstan's currency features Tomyris' image, and she is honoured as a national hero. But the connection is cultural, not proven. The Massagetae left no records to confirm or deny. What remains is a story. A man who conquered everything and died with a mouthful of blood. A woman who appeared from nowhere, killed a king, and vanished back into nothing. And an empire that survived them both. The Persian Empire did not collapse when Cyrus died. It grew. Cambyses II, his son and successor, conquered Egypt within 5 years. Something Cyrus himself had planned but never accomplished. The kingdom of the pharaohs, ancient beyond memory, fell to Persian armies in a campaign that proved the empire's strength survived its founder. Darius I expanded further still. He pushed east into India, north into Scythian territories, west toward Greece. At its height, the Achaemenid Empire stretched from Libya to Pakistan, from the Aral Sea to the cataracts of the Nile, 20 million square kilometres, 40% of the world's population, the largest empire in human history as a percentage of global humanity. Cyrus built the foundation, others built the house, and the house stood for 200 years. It stood through succession crises that should have destroyed it. Cambyses died mysteriously in Egypt, suicide some said, though others whispered assassination. A pretender named Gaumata briefly seized the throne, claiming to be Cyrus's younger son. Darius and 6 co-conspirators killed him and established a new dynasty. The empire absorbed the shock and continued. It stood through Greek resistance that should have humiliated it. Marathon, Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea. Names that echo through Western history as triumphs of freedom over tyranny, democracy over despotism. But the Persian perspective was different. Border skirmishes with an insignificant peninsula. The empire lost battles. It did not lose territory that mattered. It stood through internal rebellions that should have fragmented it. Egypt revolted repeatedly. Babylon rose and was crushed. Satraps plotted and were executed. The system Cyrus created, provincial governors, royal roads, standardized currencies, tolerance for local customs, proved resilient enough to survive anything except overwhelming external force. That force came eventually, Alexander of Macedon, a young king with his own demons, his own ambitions, his own inability to accept limits. He conquered the Persian Empire in 11 years, burning Persepolis, scattering the last Achaemenid king into the eastern wilderness. By 330 BCE, 2 centuries after Tomyris drowned Cyrus's head in blood, the empire was gone. But even then, it didn't really end. Alexander adopted Persian customs. He married Persian women. He wore Persian clothes and demanded Persian prostration. His generals, who carved his conquests into successor kingdoms, continued Persian administrative practices for generations. The Seleucids ruled from Babylon. The Parthians, who followed, claimed to restore Persian glory. The Sassanids, who followed them, made that claim explicit. Persian civilization outlasted its conquerors. Persian culture absorbed everyone who tried to destroy it. Persian identity persisted through Greek domination, and Arab conquest and Mongol devastation, and everything else history threw at it. Today, 70 million people speak Persian languages. Iranian New Year, Nowruz, is celebrated from Istanbul to Tajikistan. The Cyrus cylinder sits in the British Museum, still cited as evidence of an ancient tradition of tolerance and human rights. Cyrus won. In every way that matters across millennia, Cyrus won. Historians still debate whether he would have appreciated the victory. He died at 70, in a depression on the Central Asian steppe surrounded by the corpses of men he had led into a trap. He died because he couldn't accept that a woman might refuse him. He died because his advisors told him retreat was shameful. He died because 30 years of success had convinced him that the gods favoured him personally, and gods do not lose to nomads. The empire he built was not him. It survived because it was bigger than any individual, because the system mattered more than the founder, because institutions outlast the people who create them. Cyrus could have died peacefully in Massagetae, surrounded by grandchildren, and the empire would have grown the same way. He could have never been born at all, and someone else would have unified the Near East. The conditions were ripe. The moment was right. History was moving in that direction regardless. Great men are less important than they believe. Tomyris understood this. She didn't try to destroy the empire. She didn't dream of conquering Persia or liberating its subject peoples, she wanted one thing: the death of the man who killed her son. When she got it, she disappeared. The empire was Persia's problem, not hers. Her victory was personal. His defeat was personal. Everything else was noise. In the end, that's what separates the mortals from the myths. Cyrus became a symbol of enlightened rule, of religious tolerance, of imperial glory. Tomyris became a symbol too, of female power, of righteous vengeance, of the limits of conquest. But symbols don't bleed. Symbols don't grieve. Symbols don't stand over a corpse in the fading light of a Central Asian sunset, holding a knife that has just done its work. Two people met on the steppe in 530 BCE. One wanted a kingdom, one wanted justice. Both got what they wanted, and neither got what they needed. Cyrus needed to stop, to accept that some victories aren't worth winning, some borders aren't worth crossing, some enemies aren't worth making. He couldn't stop. Stopping was death for a conqueror, and so conquest became death instead. Tomyris needed her son back. Vengeance was a substitute, and substitutes never satisfy. She drowned Cyrus in blood, and Spargapises was still dead. She fulfilled her oath, and the grief remained. The empire endured. The man did not. The vengeance was complete. The mother was still alone. History remembers the blood. It forgets that blood is never enough.